I will leave the floor to Kees, who will do an introduction of the project and the stakeholders, just wrapping up a little bit on what the project is about. So it's up to you, Kees.
Thank you very much, and welcome everyone. Next slide, please. It's my honor to present to you the Nature First program with all the different consortium partners. Next slide, please. And the consortium is consisting of 12 partners shown on the left, including quite some academic partners, technology partners, and of course also partners that are working on the ground to test whatever we are developing. Next slide. And that's actually things that are, those are the use cases. So the field sites are shown above. That's in the Carrascorel in Spain, the Maramurex, Danube Delta, and the Stara Planina, where they've got very interesting key species, which are well known by everyone and kind of have a high like factor. But the problems are more severe than only these species. There's a huge biodiversity loss experienced on all these sites. There's habitat loss, there are human-wildlife conflicts, there's poaching going on, and there are forest fires, to name the most important ones mentioned by the field partners. And if you then look at the specific needs that they want to solve within the Nature First program, you can see that it is all about monitoring. Next slide, please. That's monitoring of the habitats of the large carnivores, but also of how the human-wildlife conflicts are developing and how human activities such as poaching are developing. Next slide, please. So the core of this program is to give biodiversity monitoring a big boost. So we introduce a number of innovations, and of course they relate and they go all the way from mapping the ecosystems that we are looking at, both the habitats and the species, but also the people, the human activities in these areas. Monitor them in terms of what changes can be detected and can we detect them early on. And that is because the most important thing that we introduce here is that we monitor these areas where possible continuously. Depending on the data that we have, for example, satellite images, those pass by every day or a few days. We can update information and see what is happening on the ground and thus monitor almost constantly. A few things will not change very fast, but fires and illegal logging and other pollution sites and so on might go very, very fast. And because we monitor things and we are on top of it, we try to also predict how things will evolve so that the people on the ground, the policymakers, the managers, and the fast responders can become more proactive. For them to do this, we introduce 3 types of sciences. We use the sciences of remote sensing, satellite images, drones, camera traps, etc. We apply the sciences of environmental forensics, attributing what's happening to a cause, and applying the science of ecological digital twins. And we've got the first ecological digital twin fully operational, which is, I think, a world record. It's the first one in the world. We develop all the different things for the sites that we are supporting up to level TRL, technology readiness level 6 or 7, and some of them even higher. And we tested them in the field. So everything that we show in this presentation is either already ready for use or soon ready. Next slide. So the domain that we look at is always the landscapes and the habitats, the species that live in these habitats. That's not only animals, but also plant species, tree species, etc. And of course, the people. Next. If you then look at what you find along these axes, you find between the landscapes and the people, of course, issues like, can people make use of the environment without destroying it in a sustainable way? And can we include communities in the maintenance of these ecological values, of these nature reserves, for example? When you look at the axis between the species and the landscapes and the habitats, then we really look at biodiversity monitoring, the core theme of this program, but also at habitat suitability mapping identifying corridors so that species can move from one area into another. On the horizontal axis, and that is the axis that will be highlighted today by two of the presentations following mine, is that we look at human-wildlife coexistence, in this case about the bear, and also about wildlife protection. Because people and species sometimes do not really coexist in a nice way, and they sometimes kill each other, and then law enforcement might be asked for. Next slide. So the way we support this within the program is through 5 data-driven levels of nature conservation, from mapping all the way to projecting. Next slide. So in the mapping of the area, we have a number of technologies that allow you to record whatever is there to be found in the area, from a digital terrain model, elevation, what kind of vegetation can be found, the moisture index, vegetation index, but also a full featured habitats classification map, and recording of where are species found, where are the people found, and where are disturbances found. Then the second level is when we start monitoring changes through time. That is what we will be working on in the next year, but this actually 2024. We are making periodic predictions that is already operational, and we are making real-time predictions, let's say for the next 4 to 8 hours, how things will evolve, and that's mostly relevant for predicting human-wildlife conflicts. And all that information is input for the 5th level, where we talk with policymakers and managers about scenarios and see if we can project how things will evolve in time if certain interventions are allowed. So let's say construction of a road, or building a dam, or removing a dam, rewilding a river, etc. What will be the consequences for all that? Next level, next slide. So in the next presentations, we will hear from our friends in Bulgaria, very concrete, what this all means, followed also by Claire from the University of Staffordshire, how forensic science kicks in. And then I will end the presentation with a number of elements that we are still developing and that we are considering to develop after this presentation in the next 2 years that we still have. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kees. So indeed, as you mentioned, we will go now on the field. We will immerse in our field site in Bulgaria, and Nikola Ganchev from the Bulgarian Academy of Sciences will let us know a little bit more what they do on the daily basis in Bulgaria, and a little bit success stories and what tools are used for monitoring. So the floor is yours, Nikola.
Yep, thank you. Can we have the next slide? Yeah, as you already said, I'm Nikola from the Bulgarian Academy of Sciences, and I'm going to tell you a bit about our work with bear protection of the bear in Bulgaria, some of the tricky parts of it, and how Nature First helps us with the tools it provides. I'm going to start with a little bit about our team. Next slide. It's Vladimir. He's the big bear professional here in Bulgaria, the emergency hotline for human-bear conflicts as well. Well, that was a joke, but he really does get a lot of these calls all the time. We have Ilya. He's an expert in mammals, also in bats. I finished my master thesis in the Netherlands, my master studies in the Netherlands recently in forest and nature conservation, and I did my thesis on bear conflict in Bulgaria, human-bear conflict. And then we have Nikola Doikin, who is also one of the leading bear experts here in the country. That's, I think, enough about the team. I'm gonna start us off with a bit about the bear distribution in Bulgaria. Next slide. Yep. As you can see, you can find bears in most of the mountainous regions in Bulgaria. And apologies for the Bulgarian in the legend of the map. The red parts basically annotate regions where you have permanent bear populations that stay there year-round. And the green regions are places where we have seen bears on occasion Sometimes they're there, sometimes they're not. So far, there's no evidence that we have like permanent populations in those locations. But what we've been seeing in recent years is that there's more and more of these green patches popping up around the country. So bears are seemingly increasing their territories and dispersing further away, which should be a good thing considering it's a protected species and we deal with them, but it also comes with a few problems. I'm going to continue with the populations of the bears. Next slide, please. As you can see, the slide should have been called population, but it's called the problem. And the problem here is that there's no consensus on what the bear populations are in the country. So on the bottom left, you can see a graph of the population between 2011 and recent years. This is the official the results of the official monitoring carried out by the government institutions, the relevant government institutions. And it shows that in 2011, there was about 500 individuals in Bulgaria, and now there's about 300, which is a very sharp decrease in populations. And it's very alarming, and as you might imagine, is basis for increasing protection of the bear. At the same time, on the right side, you can see the monitoring carried out by the National Forestry Service here in Bulgaria. It's not official, but they still do it, and they've been doing it for a long time, which actually shows an increase in population trend. And they assert that the populations are stable or increasing, and that there's actually basis for population control of the bear. And these institutions do not really like to talk to each other or reach compromises. So it's a bit difficult getting a nice and accurate estimate of what the populations are. In the meantime, next slide, please. There's a lot of conflicts happening, and the rate of conflict, of human-bear conflict, which can be a sheep getting eaten or somebody's beehives, honey getting eaten or destroyed, stuff like that. The rates of these damages have been increasing steadily. On the left, you can see this is just in one region of the country, but it's a similar picture in most places. Exponential increase in damages. And on the right side, it's people's answers when asked, do you believe that in the last 10 years bear populations have increased or decreased? And you can see all the answers are 3s and 4s and 5s, mainly 4s and 5s, meaning that people answered the populations have increased in the last 10 years or they have strongly increased in the last 10 years. And this is just the beliefs of the local people, but they still must mean something. So there's something wrong either with the monitoring, giving us wrong information, which is likely the case, or that the depopulation of rural regions is leading to bears habituating and going to the villages looking for easy food, which also is probably true, but we don't know to what extent each of them is the reason for the problem. And in this landscape, the locals are have it the worst because they don't receive the necessary assistance from the institutions, and the institutions are arguing. So what happens is, next slide, please. Yeah, it's you get a lot of poaching. And the bear was a legal hunting species in Bulgaria before 2011, when after some legislative battles between Bulgaria and the European Union, we had to, of course, accept the bear as a protected species according to EU legislation. But because it wasn't voluntarily done by the Bulgarian government, it was done very haphazardly and overnight. And so the relevant institutions and stakeholders were not prepared for it. And the local communities saw that as a strike against the local autonomy. If there was like a problem bear, previously you could get a license to get it legally shot, and that kept the people happy, basically. They could deal with their problems and conflicts. And a lot of conservationists actually warned that making the bear overnight into a protected species might cause a lot of poaching. And this was the case, indeed. Of course, we don't have official records, but unofficial records estimate that up to 100 individuals per year get poached maybe on average of 60. We don't really know because nobody gets persecuted about it. We just hear stories and cases, and yeah, it's unfortunate. So you see that the landscape of bear protection is quite complicated in Bulgaria. So what we try to do about it, and what Nature First helps us to do is, next slide please, is firstly to collect data, because we do need to know maybe not the exact number of individuals, but at least the densities, the population densities, and where conflict occurs, and are there hotspots, and so on. So we use one application from Sensing Clues within the project called Cluey, in which you can add any observations, presence data of different animals, and we use it for all sorts of animals, but we're mainly interested in the bear. Signs of presence, scratch marks on trees, paw prints, excrements, this type of stuff. And you can also note down all sorts of points of interest, infrastructure, human-wildlife conflict, fences, electric fences, and these types of things which are of interest. And this really helps us identify population and conflict hotspots within Bulgaria. And all the data that we collect, also historical data, environmental data, remote sensing data that Kees touched upon, is all feeding or will be feeding into a bear digital twin, which hopefully will help us predict and know with a better certainty where the bears are at any given moment, considering environmental factors such as, is it a dry year, is there a lot of food in the forest, is there not, and things like that, which can help us predict if bears will be closer to the villages or up in the mountains, or what they'll be doing. Next slide please. What else? We try to combat poaching and illegal activities in the forest in general. Our field site is in central Bulgaria, one of the national parks and the surrounding areas. So the national park should be quite protected, but because the control level is quite low, there's a lot of trespassing, illegal logging, and poaching, of course. So what we did is, thanks to the project, we managed to buy 10 camera traps with MMS. So like in real time, you get the photo on your phone. And we installed them at key entry points to the national park, like dirt roads and stuff like that. And we started, just every time we see one of these, all of these photos are taken by us, actually. You can see the type of machinery that goes into the national park, legally or illegally. So every time we get a photo, we text our colleagues at the park administration, park rangers, and we ask them, does this guy have a permission to be there? And they usually say, oh yeah, we know this guy, yeah, he's going to his cattle in the mountain. Sometimes they say, oh, that's interesting. Can you give us like exact coordinates, or when did this happen? And so far, it's been proving very, very effective. When we put a camera trap somewhere along the road, we see a lot of traffic, and within 1 or 2 weeks, the traffic dies down. And we also have 2 perpetrators caught with illegal logging. They received warnings, and they haven't been offending since then. So yeah, also the park administration, the park officials saw that this was effective and followed in our footsteps, installing their own camera traps. So that seems to be very effective. And eventually this data will also feed into all of the other applications of the project, to have a real-time mapping of where this stuff occurs. Next slide, please. Then we have mitigation of conflict, which is really important. And not all of these activities are within the project scope, but we do them anyway, so it's interesting to mention. One of them is translocating bear individuals. When you have a bear that repeatedly goes into the same village causing trouble, we get called in to move it. And this happens by setting a trap. When the bear gets caught in the trap, you put it to sleep, and you move it somewhere in a deeper forest, further away from civilization, and you hope that when it wakes up, it will not start looking for the next closest village to cause trouble in. This has like mixed success rate, but it's better than euthanizing them. Then we cooperate with municipalities to make the people know what the procedures are in case of damages from bears, which institutions they can call, what are their rights to reimbursement, and how they should protect themselves against it, against damages, electric fences, preventative measures, securing your trash, even this type of stuff. And we also install electric fences to people that have suffered from conflict with a bear recently. And we ask them to fill out a questionnaire asking questions about their perceptions of bears, their perceptions of the effectiveness of government measures, and if they got reimbursed, if they even reported their damage, if not, why not, this type of thing, to get a better picture of what the locals think, and eventually to use this hopefully as leverage to make some changes on a legislative level. Next slide, please. And lastly, but equally importantly, is that we try to engage stakeholders. As you heard in the beginning, the institutions don't really like talking to each other or reaching compromises, or yeah, everybody's pulling in their own direction. So what we try to do is create discussion. And this photo is actually from a meeting that was facilitated by Nature First. On this photo, you can see people from the National Hunting Enterprise, National Forestry Enterprise, from the Regional Environmental Inspectorate, from the Public Prosecution, from the Environmental Police, and I forget how many more, but a lot of different institutions on the same table trying to discuss the issues with the bear. And in the end, we try to convince everybody that we are all trying to protect the bear, and we're all trying to protect the communities, and we're trying to find a solution that is best for all parties involved. So we should be working together. And I think that covered most of it. Next slide. Thank you. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Nicola. Really like this picture. I see we have a question. Maybe we can go back to the questions after this hour. What do you think, Judith? No?
Yes, I think that's fine.
Okay, perfect. Then now that Nicola let us know a little bit more on the field side, what's happening and how Nature First can help, we can take a step back and then discuss on more theoretical level, because of course what Nature First is working on can be applied on other species and all field sites. So let's first discuss on the importance of wildlife forensics and training. And I will give the floor to Claire Gwinnett from Staffordshire University.
Hello, everybody. So I'm going to share my screen, if that's okay. While I do that, I'll just introduce myself. Is my audio okay? Perfect.
Yes.
Thank you. Brilliant. So I'm Claire Gwinnett. I'm a professor in forensic and environmental science at Staffordshire University in the UK. I am delighted to be part of this project that's really focusing on sort of the forensic science element of what Nature First can contribute using forensic science for the purposes of trying to improve biodiversity, but of course from a very particular point of view. So that is very much looking at human-wildlife conflict, and in this sense these are legal activities that we're interested in, such as poaching. So I just want to double check. I'm just making sure my screen is sharing appropriately there. I think that's fine. So I'm going to give you a little bit of an essence of forensic science and how it fits in with Nature First. To do that, I really got to give you a bit of an explanation of what forensic science is. I could imagine that a lot of you have heard of forensic science, given the fact that it is in most TV series and movies, actually. But actually, when it comes down to what it is and how we use it, quite a lot of people don't really know what that means, and the breadth of the different sciences that are involved in this particular area. So just to give you a little flavour of this, essentially think of it as any science or discipline or topic or area of expertise that can be used for the purposes of gathering evidence, for interpreting evidence, for the purposes of the court. And when we say for the purposes of the court, this is everything from what we've heard already, which is around the investigation, the detection at scene in our different field sites about this illegal activity, to all the way to the courts for the potential of a prosecution. Now, it doesn't every case doesn't always go that whole way, but actually there are benefits on that journey, in that investigative process, to try and understand what's happening, who's involved, and how can we actually mitigate this and reduce this. So that's really where forensic science sits, in all aspects, from crime scene to court, and in all disciplines. And this is a very small image here, but it's really just to show you the breadth of the different topics that feed into forensic science. And traditionally we think about biology, chemistry, we think about maybe criminalistics in terms of things like finger marks, etc. But it really covers all aspects, even down to accounting, document analysis. And this is important for us to understand in Nature First, because we realise that it's not just about traditional scenes. This is, for example, looking at the authenticity, for example, of permits of people who have them to fish, for example, in given areas. So what we're trying to capture here is all of this different expertise and how this can feed into Nature First. To give you an essence of the evidence that we could capture in Nature First, I've got to just show you this person here. And this is the fundamental principle that we are using, not only in investigations worldwide, investigations in the UK that I'm involved in investigating, that are both human and animal crimes, but every single investigation, including those that would cover Nature First. And that principle is, as it was termed and coined by this man here called Edmund Locard. And this understanding that every contact leaves a trace is what we can rely on and exploit for our purposes when we think about the activities of individuals at different scenes. And those include our field sites and any other Natura 2000 site that might have this kind of activity going on. So what we're trying to understand now is this idea of how evidence such as impression evidence like finger marks, how cellular biological information that we might be able to get DNA evidence from, other impression evidence such as footwear impressions or tire mark impressions left at the scene that might be of use to identify individuals or vehicles. And then anything else that can actually leave this trace, which is not just particular, but other impressions such as tool marks that have been used to cut through chains to get into locations, through gates, etc., to break into given areas, and the particulates that ultimately get left behind and taken with them by these suspects. So anything from just soil botanical information, is a huge amount of forensic evidence present in there, because it contains everything from industrial type materials to natural type materials as well. And when we're looking at paint, we're looking at concrete. In this case, we're looking at pollen, for example, that might be present at these scenes within soil matrices that ultimately can be taken away. Other information or other evidence, such as hair evidence, helps start to lead things like intelligence information, which I'll touch on in a second. But this is important for trying to understand the types of evidence, such as hair and such as fibres from textiles, that are inevitably going to be left in these scenes, that we're going to attempt to try and use to link back to these individuals and this activity. And what's important there is this activity. What was actually happening there? Was it illegal? Was it not? It's not just about the presence of a person, because as you can imagine in these sites, there's a lot of people present, but it's about what was being done there. Now, there's a very important part, and what we're talking about in Nature First is about data gathering. It is about digital evidence in itself. Digital forensics is its own discipline, but the use of data for the purposes of trying to gain intelligence information and also be able to interpret what's going on at the scene is now becoming more and more important than ever. In forensic science, which I'll just add has been going on, for over 100 years in terms of actively using this in forensic investigations, only in the last 10 are we truly using data in a way that helps police, rangers, forensic scientists like myself in actually being able to combat these crimes. And this is really now pulling together this idea of data from Nature First, this idea that every contact leaves a trace, whether that's between people and locations, or of course, in this case, animal and people, and then trying to answer questions from that. And these questions that we want to answer are going to be fit for purpose. They've got to be the types of question that we want them to be able to uncover for the courts, to be able to maybe lead to a prosecution, or in the first instance, put in place some mitigation activity that is going to prevent this or reduce this type of activity. So when we're thinking about those principles that I've just said, and we're saying about there's this exchange in these materials, there's three factors that Nature First are going to take into account, and we are taking into account. Firstly, can we detect these traces in this exchange at these scenes, given that these scenes are dynamic, they are large scenes, and there are challenges in there? And can we quantify them and record them in a useful way? Then can we use the data from that to understand, or can those who need to investigate this have access to this data that Nature First will create in order to be able to understand the evidential value? And that said here is this exchange discriminating? Is it able to discriminate between that individual doing that activity or something legitimate, for example? And then finally, how can we communicate this data that could be very complex in some instances, and a lot of data? How can it be communicated to those who need to use it, but also the end users as well, whether that is judge or jury, depending on the country? So that is the underlying principles that we are applying in Nature First from forensic science. These are, like I said, these are not new principles. Edmund Locard coined that phrase in the early 1900s, and we've been using it ever since. But now we need to apply it a little bit more proactively to wildlife type cases. And this image here kind of depicts what we're trying to achieve, which is this understanding that if we've got an individual or individuals and they are present in a location, they're going to leave behind and take away with them this evidence. Whether that is to particular regions, and in this case, we're obviously looking at our field sites, but there's obviously other natural regions, whether it is being transferred to other individuals involved. And when we talk about poaching, there almost always is a chain of events and a chain of individuals involved, whether one has been at a scene or otherwise. There are always multiple people further down the line. And then it's also about then how is this evidence being moved around, not just in the environment, but between maybe things being transported using different transport mechanisms. So whether that is vehicles in a sense of road vehicles, whether that is boats, and those animals that are involved that are going to also leave behind evidence. So in this case, it might be for our bear poaching instances, hares that are taken away on individuals, and individuals leaving behind footwear marks at these scenes. And that is also true for our other species of interest. So when we think of sturgeon as a species of interest, we're talking about a different animal now. We might have different things left behind, but the principles are still the same. So it is us trying to understand what is going on to answer the key questions that we ask in any case: the what, the where, the how, the who, the when, and the why. And these are some of the types of questions on the right-hand side that we might pose against that. And these are dependent, of course, on the crime type. It depends on the species as well. Might have particular questions of interest when we talk about bear poaching, for example. But ultimately, we're trying to answer these questions to reconstruct what's happened so that we can do two things. Try to apprehend offenders, of course, would be fantastic, and also at the same time preventative measures so that we can do something actively, proactively to be able to prevent that. Now there's something here why Nature First is novel, it's game-changing, it is pushing the future of forensic science in wildlife crime investigation. And that is because in wildlife crime investigation, we generally have lots of challenges and resource issues that do not allow us to be able to tackle crimes in the same way as we would tackle a on-human crime. So for example, a murder investigation or some other serious crime. I'm going to just take 2 minutes to show you a case and the potential of forensic science, and then end with this: how are we going to, and what are we doing in Nature First to try and harness our knowledge that we use regularly, globally, to tackle on human crimes, and how we can now start doing that on wildlife crimes as well. So this case, I'm just going to put a little caveat here. Some of you might not have heard this before. This is a serious crime that was happening in Maryland, in the USA. It was of a serial rapist, and it is a bit of a sensitive issue. So please, I just want to caveat this with, I am just going to very briefly talk about a serious crime. But in this particular case, this was a serial offender, which is what we also see in serial offenders in wildlife crimes. So there's some parity here. This is a serial offender who was incredibly good at preventing identification. At the time in Maryland, this is some years ago, this actually caused quite a lot of public distrust and lack of confidence in the police and those investigating this. It also caused a lot of public panic at the time, because this individual was repeatedly offending and had a certain modus operandi. And I'll pick up that in a minute, because this also relates to wildlife crime. So this individual would cover the faces of the victims and particularly attack victims in very dark locations. So there was no identification or description of what this person looked like at all. And at some point, even the most forensically minded individual will leave behind forensic evidence. In this case, this person did leave behind forensic evidence in the form of DNA from high vaginal swabs. But that was of no interest, or no use to the police at this stage, because there was no identification of a suspect, because this individual was not on a DNA database. Therefore, there was no intelligence information. And I'm deliberately using these terms because these are the terms that we're tackling and addressing in Nature First. So there was no intelligence information. What they did have at one point was some evidence left behind, and it was this what you're seeing on the screen here. There was two sports jerseys that got left behind because they believed the offender had got disturbed during the act of the crime. And on this, it might just look like a sports shirt, but was a wealth of trace evidence that has been transferred over time onto these from not just victims, but from the locations that this individual, this perpetrator, had frequented, where that person lived and where that person worked. And that's what it looks like when I talk about trace evidence. It's little teeny tiny particulates on there that very, very small little vacuum collected. But what it shows is so much information when we look and dig deeper. And what you're seeing on the screen here on the left are pollen granules, on the top right are mineral granules, and on the bottom right are teeny tiny spheres of paint. That might not say much to the non-forensic scientists, but to forensic scientists who examine this is the profile they were able to produce, therefore giving intelligence information to the police and investigators about this particular individual. To start with, that first bit might not be so interesting. It was worn by the same person. That's not going to help identify the suspect. Neither is the second one necessarily, because a lot of people work indoors. Yeah. But the last ones are very particularly interesting, because this is starting to give a location of the individual and where that person lives or works, which is an area that had a lot of oak trees. They knew that from the pollen granules that you've just seen. From that second to last one, they knew the occupation of this individual. They knew this person was a drywall installer, like you see in offices. But they didn't just install, they also finished. And when I say finished, it means sanding down, ready for the painting. That is two different jobs in the US, by the way, and different companies do different things. So now we're narrowing down the individuals who could be involved. How do they know that? Well, then those mineral granules that have been ground up, they are what you find in drywall. And that final bit is, what kind of company does he work for then? And they were able to say this person was worked for a large-scale company on large renovations, not a small scale, because small-scale companies use brush or roller to do the paint on the drywall. Large-scale companies use spray paint. And that is what you're identifying when you see teeny tiny spheres of paint. What happened with this case was it led to a conviction. This conviction was identified because that intelligence information was provided not to the public, to people who were interested, to the investigators. And actually, what had happened was the public actually called up the police and said, I can see down the road an unusual van. We don't normally see it here, but on the side I can see it's a company. I've Googled the company. It's a drywall installer and fitter. finisher, and it's a large-scale company. Would you mind sending somebody out? The investigators, police, detectives in that case come out, and they caught the guy red-handed. And in fact, he confessed in that vehicle to these crimes. The big point here is that led to that identification and that activity that brings someone, ultimately, this to justice. If that person hadn't confessed, by the way, I may add, he would have still got convicted because they had DNA evidence that now they could link to them. But this is a puzzle about putting this together that helps investigators come to a conclusion and help actually harness the public, harness, in this case, let's move on to wildlife crime, those who are also policing these environments like rangers, to be able to take action and to be able to actually feel informed. And this begs the question now, well, why aren't we doing the same thing? I'd love to be able to give you an example right now that showed that kind of level of intelligence gathering for a wildlife crime, but it just doesn't happen. And it's because of these things on here. And I won't go through each one, but essentially what we're talking about is wildlife crime investigations are incredibly challenging. They're challenging not just because of the environment and the scale of the problem. And when I say the scale, it's not just the sheer size of these spaces that need policing and that these occurring, but it's the scale of the amount of these types of crimes that can happen. The individuals involved are generally well informed, and there's always some sort of reason or a defense that can be given. It's actually very hard to tackle, especially, and that is both for those front end and for the courts. And then those who are actually trying to combat this, for wildlife crime investigations, the amount of training is minimal. The amount of experience and resources that can be given is minimal. And that is a global issue right now. And at the same time, that capacity is less because there's less trained people to be able to even do the work. On top of all of that, the data that we would have supporting a murder investigation, for example, that DNA databases, etc., are fantastic. The amount of information to help police on the ground for wildlife crime investigations is absolutely minimal. There is barely anything that can be there. And that is what Nature First is trying to tackle. Let me end, if that's okay, I'm just looking at you, Edith, I've just got a couple more minutes, on showing now how Nature First is now integrating, based on all of that, at how we are bringing in forensic science to tackle this problem. Because we have acknowledged that we need to apply this kind of knowledge from human crimes to wildlife crimes. At the same time, we want to push forward that use of forensic science beyond the basics that we're seeing globally, and including that in it's not just our field sites, this is a global issue. Then we want to maximize that amount of information by great documentation, by being able to make that accessible to those who can investigate, but by empowering individuals to be able to collect that data. And this is what Kees has been talking about, and what Nicola has been giving some examples of the mechanisms of being able to capture that data. And ultimately share best practice so that we can understand how we can actually tackle this better. In one little, and I'm going to be very careful now. I just want to show you this as a diagram. The one thing, if you don't remember anything else, I want you to remember this image here, because this is what we're going to harness from this large real-time data set. We're going to get 4 key things from this. And to facilitate that, we're going to do training for those who are going to find this very useful to be able to employ on the ground, but also train the trainer in forensic science techniques in order for that to be rolled out, scaled up, to be delivered to other individuals. How that will then empower those with the knowledge, the skill set to be able to capture this data, capture evidence, document that correctly so that it can facilitate these 4 things. And just bear with me a second while I explain what each of these 4 things are, because this is the power of the forensic science in Nature First. It really is. Firstly, it's going to provide intelligence. You've heard that already mentioned in the Maryland rapist case. In this case, we can gather that intelligence through this hotspot detection of different crime types that are occurring in field sites. At the same time, that mapping also allows different kinds of trends to be brought out, because further information, for example, about the types of activity on that crime, the types of evidence present, help us understand the modus operandi, the methods, the behaviours of these perpetrators, so that we can start identifying how best to tackle it. And when I say we, the royal we, those who work on these investigations, that ultimately is about identifying perpetrators or suspects, individuals of interest, when you don't have anything at all, of course. And that is a huge step forward. This next one, proactive policing. This is now about taking that information from intelligence and using it proactively from a policing point of view, whether it is actually police forces or it's even those on the ground, those rangers, those people who are looking and controlling and protecting these environments. And the purpose of that is to try and prevent the crime before it even occurs. That, of course, is our goal, the gold standard, exactly what we want. And how we do that is using that intelligence information just mentioned for the purposes of very specific mitigation activities like directed patrols, particular maybe placement of camera traps to gather other information. And then, of course, that is going to lead to improved use of resources. If this is a police investigation, this is about where do you put the minimum amount of people that is available, where do you put them, how do you use them, at what time of day and what time in year. And it also allows to drive this last one, which has been known to be seriously effective, even more effective than the use of directed patrols, which is about community-wide organised initiatives that we already know our field sites do in terms of engaging the public and locals. It is about now targeting and using that information to make even more effective initiatives. Last but one. It's retrospective evidence for prosecution. So this is now this information that's being gathered, that data that's being collected, the courts may want to use this, investigators might want to use this for the purposes of taking something to trial or further investigation or linking between scenes and between crimes. And that is key for the use of this ultimately to lead to prosecution in the criminal justice system. And the data that's to be collected, we acknowledge in nature first, has to keep its integrity. So we're thinking about how that gets documented, how that gets stored, about the sensitivity of that data and who has access to it. And then finally, the gold platinum standard of what we want to achieve. And this again, achieved globally, is this evidence-based policing approaches. The real way to make change, positive change, is being able to use data to be able to do the likes of random control trials on different activities, mitigation activities, new ideas that either police investigators or anyone who is working in this area wants to try to find out what works and what doesn't work, for the purposes then of thinking about what's next. How should we invest our time, our money, and all of that leads, and has been shown, that leads to increased public confidence in those who are trying to tackle this as a global issue and from Nature First point of view in our field sites and tackling biodiversity decline. Thank you so much for that. And I do apologise, I've gone 4 minutes over my time, I think, there. So I'll stop sharing and I'll just pause and, of course, open for questions at the question point in time. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Claire. So, yeah, if you have questions, feel free to put it in the chat and we will walk through it later after this last presentation. And yeah, it's up to you again, Kees, to talk a little bit more about the value propositions of the project and the hopes for the future.
All right, I will, the slides and everything will be shared, so I will not tweet every element on it, so you can read it later on your own page. But the value propositions are related to what I explained in the introduction. It's about the species, the landscapes, and the people, and all our interactions, from the levels from mapping all the way to predicting how things might go in the future. Next one. So we have accomplished a number of the challenges that we formulated during the project, and those have been accomplished. I will skip them for now. Next one. We are working on a number of things right now as we speak. So we are monitoring the changes in the habitats, is work that we are starting very soon. Change detection is a big thing. Species density maps, how to change these is also something that is in progress. The most exciting one is actually the human wildlife conflict early warning, which is a digital twin development. I can show a little bit more about that later. And we are working on education kits. Those are all in progress. We will not discuss them at length to what they all entail, but you can read them later on your own pace. Next. We are also considering a few things and building things that we are still in dialogue with all the key players, and anyone from outside is also free to join there and to help us with setting priorities. But one of the things that we aim for is a seamless information flow from what you gather in the field, what is known from any different types of information source, whether it's from on-the-ground inspections or satellite derived or any other source. We actually automatically try to harvest all that data. We have an ecological system base map, which is created automatically with at the moment already more than 25 layers of information. We created and used that information to create risk maps and sophisticated habitat maps. And all these are stored in what we call the GeoServer. It's an open source environment which anyone can set up, but in the SenseClues platform, we have an instance of that. All the information that is at the GeoServer can be uploaded to your Cluey application, which is the handheld application that you can bring with you into the field, so that any type of that information that is relevant for you, that will increase your situational awareness of where you are. I'm currently in a risky zone or a hotspot for certain activities or not? Am I now in the land owned by a certain individual or owned by the state, or having a certain protection level or lacking that protection level? Then all that information, if we got it on the GeoServer, you can have it also with you on your phone, so that you always know where you are and have maximum situational awareness, as we call that. That last part from the GeoServer to the phone is a dashed line, so that is work in progress. All the other lines are proven technologies by now and readily available for everyone. Next slide. So this information is important not only for people in the field officers, could be foresters, could be biologists or researchers in the field, but also, of course, for the managers of protected area sites who have to think about how am I going to manage this area, what are the big problems in my area, which one has highest priority, etc. It's for analysts because they can have the data and make all kinds of analysis with them. Researchers usually like to put their hands on the raw data, and that's also possible. So they don't like all the applications that we are building, but they want to use it with all the maximum degrees of freedom they like, so they can get access to the raw data. But then also, of course, all these different information products are used by policymakers or can be used by policymakers to think about the future and to think about how, for example, human wildlife conflicts can best be managed from a policy level. Next one. So we do have very strong methods now and tested them in the Ankaras QRL for classifying and mapping habitats. We use the UNIS classification there, but also other classification systems can be used. And the next level with the things that we will be working on in, let's say, the next 12 months, is that from the habitat perspective, we are going to monitor and see if we can detect changes like habitats that become bigger or smaller or less in quality, or invasive species that are popping in, or bear populations that are increasing or decreasing, or human activities that are also increasing or decreasing, or maybe kind of transposing to another area. If you are controlling one area very well, maybe the people are going to another area and do the same. So it's not only habitats, we look again also at the species and also at the disturbances that can be found in these areas. This is what we will be working on next year, mostly, to have also these monitoring products and services completely available. Next slide. So one of the very, very nice things that we work on, everyone is very excited about it, is what we call digital twins. And these are predictions that allow you to predict in the next few hours where, for example, in this case, the cranes are migrating. If you see them, then where can I see them in the next few hours? And the same is true for bear and human wildlife conflicts with the bear. So given the last sightings of the bear, given the habitat that he is in, the landscape, what kind of elements can be found in that landscape, and also given his kind of behavioral needs, his shopping list, so to say. He wants to eat, he wants to breed, he loves honey, but he does not like dogs. If we know in the landscape where these things can be found, then we can predict and kind of make a risk assessment where the bear could be more likely to be found or less likely. And that is something that we are working on right now, and that hopefully also will be completed, the first versions, by the summer of next year. Next slide. So the value propositions that we are working on in under consideration, I think there's a few stars missing here. Anyway, the habitat suitability mapping is something that most of the field sites really would like to have. And that means that we use these ecosystem base maps, but also the information that we have, the knowledge that we have about the species. We can combine that together and construct habitat suitability classes and habitat suitability maps for specific species. If you've got that, then you can also look at the landscape and identify corridors so that the bear can roam easier from one area into another, and maybe also cause less problems. Of course, the habitat trend detection is an important, the changes in the habitats, to detect these changes is an important feature. The wildlife fire impact, or if there has been fires, and often these fires could be huge, it's important to, as soon as possible, have an assessment of the severity of that fire and the damage that has been caused. That was also one of the value propositions that we are considering, but it was low scored at the moment by most of the field sites. And a very challenging one, and that is one of the most sought after within our field sites, is estimating the size of the populations. And that is actually a very tough one, because that can not only be technology, of course, with technology, it's quite easy to count and stuff, but it also requires a proper method. And the method has to be executed by people in the fields. So synchronizing the method with the technologies and also the analytics that then follows makes this one very, very challenging. As you also saw in the story of Nicola, if you use one method, you think the bear population is dwindling. If you use another method, you estimate the population size is almost double that size. So how can we find a scientific method that really has proper meaning and a lot of evidence? The CSI kit is something that Claire was also talking about. So if you find evidence in a crime scene, for example, a poaching incident, then how can you secure that evidence so that it can be used in court, or if it's not in court, then maybe to find out if there's relations between one site and another one, or one type of animal that has been poached and another one, so that you can find modus operandi and maybe understand better how poachers are successful. And then, because you know how they work, you can maybe also try to put a stick in their wheel. And then, of course, the last one is alerting services, to alert people that are in the area, like foresters or law enforcement officers, to notify them as soon as we know that something is happening, to notify them. Next slide, please. This is an example of the habitat suitability mapping. So it's a method that we tested before, and it results in a map that is specialized and optimized for, in this case, the bear. And then on the right hand, you see how, together with experts, you can interpret the map and identify corridors. This is one of the products that most of the field sites would really like to see. So we will try our best to implement that also within the project time. Next one. Any questions?
Thank you very much, Kees. So I would suggest for this last half an hour to go back to the questions we had at the beginning and just walk through them. I see the first question was for Nicola, but maybe I see it's from Pavel. Maybe Pavel is still here with us and would like to ask the question directly.
Yeah, I also read it already, so I
Okay.
think I can take it away. So I can just read it out loud for everyone. In 2023, for the first time, there were several cases of bears entering settlements, and not only sparsely populated villages, but also cities, even in the vicinity of the capital. This was also shown frequently on television. This probably indicates that the population is increasing, and as claimed by the Forest Department, and not just a result of increasing conflicts due to the depopulation of villages. Is it really so, or are the foresters' data greatly inflated? It's a good question. And it will have to go back to the methodologies that are used by the two institutions to count the bears. So the foresters use a very kind of primitive methodology. So the forestry districts are usually located around the national park. At least in our field site, they're around the national park. And within those districts, they feed the animals. They feed the game species, so deer and so on. So that makes a great incentive for the bears to go from the national park to the forest district units or whatever. So what the forestry people do is within their district, they count the bears, and then they add up the number of all the districts from all the around the mountain, and that's the population. But what they don't account is that the bears are attracted to the food, firstly, and secondly, that the boundaries of their district is not the boundaries of the bear roaming area or the bear territory. So the bear goes in the morning to one forest district, eats the food, then goes in the afternoon to the next one, eats the food, gets counted twice, and then leaves. So it is quite inflated, their methodology. The other methodology, which gives us the declining trend, is also pretty bad. It uses a lot of extrapolation and from very few data points, and every year they collect the data on the same days, no matter what the weather conditions are. So if it's super dry, you don't see any animal tracks, you get a low estimate. If it's wet, you get a lot of tracks. It's pretty bad. And the people that carry it out are not always experts, so they don't see all the traces and so on. So the real number of bears is probably somewhere in the middle. And we really don't know if the trend is up or down in that case. And why do the bears go in the villages? This is interesting because this is not only in Bulgaria. So this year, what we saw when we went to for monitoring higher in the mountains, no bear tracks. All the bear tracks are low in the lower mountains, in the forests next to villages and around villages. This is because it was very dry and there was no food in the forest, so they all went in the down looking for food. And it's interesting because the same thing was observed in Croatia and Slovenia, which are countries that have a lot better estimates of their population. And even though the population is not increasing there, they still got the same pattern of increased conflicts and more bears in the lowlands. So I hope that answers the question, kind of.
Yeah, there was also another question for you, Nicola, from Alexandra. I don't know if Alexandra is still here. It was about bears population.
Yeah, hi.
Oh, yeah.
So it's not really a question, it's more a statement about the numbers that you mentioned, like 60 bears seems for me quite high. If I think of the total population size and since when, so with caution.
Yeah, that's true. It is about the 60 bears poached per year estimate. First, it's really an estimate because we don't know. Like there's no good way. It's all word of mouth. But just the last year, in 2022, just in our field site around like the Stara, the Central Balkan, which is one of 4 bear-populated regions, we know of 17 bears that were poached. That's for last year, just for one region. So if you extrapolate to the other 3, probably comes close to 60. And if we assume that the bear populations are somewhere between the estimates of the two institutions, so between 300 and 1,000, let's say 500-600. Their natural growth is about 10% per year. So it would be.
That's also too high. 10%. That's not in Europe. You don't have 10% of growth in any of the bears.
Could be. And that's what.
No, that's biologically unrealistic. Completely.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I just
I might be wrong. I'm not the zoologist. I'm quoting colleagues. But anyway, it might be inflated indeed. But at the same time, we're pretty sure it's high. It's in that ballpark. I'm not saying 60 every year. Perhaps some years it's higher. Now that this year we had a lot of conflicts again because of the drought and the lack of food, and we had a lot of cases of orphaned cubs with their mothers disappearing in like weird circumstances. So there's definitely a lot of poaching. I'm not standing by 60 bears. I'm not willing to die on this hill to defend this number, but it's definitely high, and it should be 0 in the end.
Yeah, of course. I just say, because you said it's an estimate, there are good estimates and bad estimates. So
yeah, okay, we can agree that this is a questionable estimate. Yeah, Pavel.
Yeah, thank you, Nicola. Yeah, I have an additional question on that. Do you also collect data from the insurance companies about the damages that were caused by bears, for instance?
No, we don't. As far as I know, at least it hasn't been. I haven't seen that, and I don't know if the colleagues do that. The thing is that most people do not insure their properties. That's also one of the reasons they don't report the damages officially, because, okay, I have like 3 apiaries, 3 beehives. I'm not going to register them in the municipality. They're not officially there. So when a bear comes and destroys them, I cannot report the damages because they weren't registered. Like my beehives were not registered. So when I did my thesis, it was I asked a lot. One of the questions that I was asking the people is your property insured, or do you believe insuring your property against wildlife damage is something that is a good idea? And nobody insures it. Nobody. Like maybe there was like 1 or 2 out of 600 interviewed people that insured their property. So unfortunately, no.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Nicola. I see there was also a question from Astrid for Jan Kees. Is Astrid here?
Yes, I'm here. Hello. No, my question was, is there any intention to tackle also freshwater species in the project? And the other question to Claire, whether there are forensic methods to actually detect crime in water.
Mm-hmm. The second question is for Claire. The first question is, we selected the trials based on the needs of the partners that are in the field with us. And so we are looking into the sturgeon in the Danube Delta, but not at other fish species. So that is the water related environment that we are studying in this project. Because of the limitations of the project time and resources, we cannot expand that to others. But the methods that we are developing and the technologies that we are developing can be applied in other circumstances as well. So they are kind of generic.
Yeah, but remote sensing would not work for water. So which methods do you apply then?
Well, it depends on what type of information sources you have, and then funneling and connecting these data sources and information sources to the platform is the generic part. But what you do in terms of analysis, how you can interpret the water or the water depth, the reflections you get from the water in terms of is it clear or polluted, or is there a lot of algae and other maybe disturbances could be measured, but of course they are completely different analytical routines than you would see when you are analyzing a dry landscape or a sand or a forest or anything like that. So the analytics that you perform are always quite specific for the vegetation or the land cover you're looking at. And also with the chem traps, looking at the mammals is a very different exercise than looking at insects or butterflies or using them underwater. So those are all almost, but in an approach type of looking at things, they are conceptually the same. But of course, connecting them requires a lot of work and study and so on. Yeah. But principally, conceptually it would work, and technically as well. Yeah.
Hi, Astrid. Great question, because a lot of people think as soon as there's water involved, or a water environment, or any kind of anything that you think that's going to remove evidence, that they can't do any forensic work, which is an absolute myth. So there's a lot of work, a lot of underpinning research and adaptations of methods that we use in forensics for the purposes of water type environments, water-based evidence, and even a whole genre of underwater crime scene investigation, which is fantastic. And again, remember the reasons for this. These weren't developed, and I would say unfortunately for wildlife crime investigations, they were made for on human crimes. And the thing about that is use of waterways, both freshwater and salt water, and all different types of bodies of water have been used since goodness crimes began, to conceal, to throw away evidence, discard evidence, to throw away bodies. So a lot of the research and the techniques that have been adapted and created, we can apply in wildlife crime scenes. And like, for example, say there's something that's involving like a wet surface, so we've got some illegal fishing, or we've got some illegal poaching, and we want to link some people to some items. There's been a lot of work, for example, on how best to recover those finger marks given these items are wet, and that's just one example of one evidence. So yeah, there's a lot that can be done. What I think needs to happen is seeing that realized in the world of wildlife forensics, and this tackling this from biodiversity point of view. But yeah, the science is there.
Cool, thank you.
Are there any other questions for Jan Kees, Nicola, or Claire? No? Okay, well, thank you very much, everyone, for joining this webinar. Let's keep in touch. Feel free to follow us on social media. We have a LinkedIn page of Nature First. We have a website where we post some blogs and interviews, and also podcasts with some of our project members. And you can also subscribe to our newsletter. We put the link in the chat. If you would like to discuss about any topics that was presented today, or if have any other questions about the project, just feel free to reach out, and we will talk further. So you will receive the recording and the slides of this webinar, and have a very nice afternoon. I hope to see you again in another webinar of Nature First, or also physical event in the future.